Hey there, Mama. You're listening to the Lift the Shame podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, mama of 5 and your family's intuitive eating dietitian, here to help you cut through the diet culture clutter so you can enjoy freedom with food as a family. I'm on a mission to help you end the generational legacy of diet culture in your home so you can experience motherhood free from food guilt and body shame. Listen in weekly for guidance on how you can ditch diet culture, heal your relationship with food and your body, and confidently raise intuitive eaters. Let's dive in and lift the shame together. Hey there, Mama. Welcome back to the show. I hope I didn't leave you on too much of a cliffhanger after last week's episode. We explored why kids don't really need to be introduced to nutrition facts to live their healthiest lives. And in fact, we kind of uncovered how the premature introduction of nutrition information and nutrition facts can actually create more harm than good, even when done with good intention. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that episode, make sure you go back to episode 24. And again, I know that all of this can really fly in the face of what everything diet culture purports and tells us that we need to be doing to raise healthy children. We talked a little bit about the often hidden agendas that come with introducing nutrition information to our kiddos, and really how that can contradict the innate wisdom that their bodies have to guide their food choices that support them to grow into the bodies that they're meant to have and to grow into their healthiest selves. So today, I want to explore just some ideas and ways that you can foster a healthy relationship with food that don't involve diet culture tactics or hidden agendas so that you can ultimately continue to support your family's freedom with food and rewrite your legacy, your feeding legacy, so that it doesn't stem from diet culture whatsoever. Because that's something that I see a lot, is that a lot of advice out there on how to feed kids and how to raise our children is often interlaced with this, again, hidden agenda or idea of steering kids in a certain direction that may not necessarily be aligned with what they need or what best supports their individual and unique needs. And that's very true with food as well. Oftentimes when we see a child have a certain way of eating or a certain temperament around food, or if a child has a large appetite, or let's say a child is more selective and not super interested in food, all of those things can stir up in us a need to want to steer them towards eating in a certain way. Often that is set by diet culture, like expectations created by diet culture in terms of, hey, if you want to raise a healthy child, this is what they should look like, or this is how they should be eating, or this is what their body size should be looking like. And I'm hoping that as we delve into some of this further, that you can feel confident in how you're approaching food in your home, so that you're nurturing your child and supporting them where they're at, wherever that may be. So we're going to dive into that today. And really, a lot of this is based on the premise of trust, that your body can be trusted, that you can learn to trust your children to eat what they need from the foods that you provide them, even if it looks completely different from what you expect them to eat. Remember that we've been conditioned to view health and nutrition in a manner that's largely influenced and skewed by diet culture. And so oftentimes that's what creates a lot of turmoil and stress, is when we've had this expectation, again, that's been painted by diet culture, and there's a big discrepancy between expectation and reality. And that doesn't mean that anything's wrong. That doesn't mean that your child is doing something wrong, or that your child is doomed for poor health because they're not eating a ton of fruits and veggies, or, they lean more towards carbohydrates. Like, I think these are all the conflicting ideas that we can have when it comes to feeding kids. And so I just want to give you some ideas to support you, again, with raising a healthy child. And that encompasses so much more than just the food they eat. When I think about things that support a healthy child, I think about peaceful relationships. I think about peaceful interactions and trust and connection that's built between a parent and their caregiver. And when our kids feel our trust in them, that supports them in internalizing a belief that I can trust my body too. And that goes such a long way in supporting self-regulation and confidence and so many things that do play an important role in helping our children build confidence in themselves and in their bodies, and ultimately improving their health and improving overall health outcomes. So I hear you. You want your kiddo to be healthy. And here is something that I hope is so freeing for them. If you want your child to be healthy, you don't need to teach them about health or nutrition. Again, remember that those concepts are very abstract and they are very nuanced. They mean different things for different people. And so to try to put health in a box and then make our kids fit that picture of health is very challenging in a lot of ways, and often creates a lot of negative problems and issues around food in their bodies that we don't want to be. We don't want to be there. So I'm going to split this up a little bit just for sake of time, and also to not overwhelm you with so many things at once, because I know as a parent that you want to do all the things. And it's really important to just think about those baby steps or those little things that we do on a daily basis that really make a difference over the course of raising a child, right? So we're going to go over maybe 5 or 6 points today in terms of things that you can do to support your child's health that don't involve teaching them about health. Because again, that idea of teaching health is very conflicting and comes with so many hidden agendas that can cause our child to question their own bodies and really to dissociate from their internal intuitive eating abilities. And we, as much as possible, want to do our part in preserving that. So I'm going to kind of run through these things and delve into this a little bit. And again, we'll have a part 2 to this tomorrow. And I titled this episode, Vegetables Will Not Save Your Child's Health, because let's face it, that is the predominant message that so many of us are hearing as parents is you got to get your kids to eat their vegetables. And I probably am putting more emphasis on it than there actually is. But it's true, right? Like we hear it everywhere. And I know that this is a huge stressor for a lot of parents too. Like, hey, my kiddo doesn't like to eat vegetables and now I'm stressing about this. And we put so much weight on it as if our kids eating vegetables is going to make or break their health. And there's so much more to your child's health than this. And that's why I wanted to start with that and just give you permission to let go of some of these expectations that may still be in your mind when it comes to supporting your child's overall health. Vegetables is a very, very, very small, tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle. There's so many other pieces involved, especially when it comes to food and nutrition and mental health and all those things. So let's talk about this. So tip number 1 here, we talked about this in last week's episode, but if you want your children to be healthy, don't teach them about health. Remember that health is so relative and it really does vary from person to person and culture to culture. It means so many different things for different people. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to health. And often what comes with nutrition facts is potential to breed rules around food for our children. And again, if you didn't get a chance to listen to last week's episode, I definitely want to encourage you to check it out. What happens when we are introducing nutrition facts to our kids, they can internalize that as rules around food. So, hearing like, oh, I shouldn't eat that, or too much of that is going to be bad for me. So they can start to form this dichotomy and a hierarchy around food in their minds when it comes to eating. And I know for so many of you that I've talked to, like this was the start of eating disorder behaviors and really just a black and white perspective on food. And so we want to try to avoid that as much as possible and just be intentional about offering and providing a variety of different things at meals and snacks or various eating times, and really just trusting our kids to eat what they need without us trying to micromanage them. And oftentimes the way or our subtle attempts at micromanaging comes with introducing nutrition facts like, oh, hey, did you know that eating this can make you so strong and healthy? And again, like our kids don't understand what that means. Like it can be like they're hearing something in a foreign language. And over time, that can start to create that hierarchy of food in their mind, which again breeds food rules, which can breed, rigidity around food and eating. And we want to try to avoid that with them. So that's, first step there. Like you want to help your kids with their health, like avoid talking about health. I know it seems so counterintuitive, but it's a big piece of the puzzle. Another tip here is when it comes to food, instead of focusing on facts, calories, nutrition information, which again, a lot of us have been inundated with this information. And I know like it may be something that's even ingrained in your mind. And that could be from years of dieting or dealing with an eating disorder in various shapes and forms. I know that this information might be ingrained in your head. And it's easy to, again, kind of regurgitate some of that information, even subconsciously when it comes to our kids. But instead of focusing on that information, one thing that can be really helpful to supporting your children in building a healthier relationship with food is focusing instead on the characteristics of food. So that means, what is your language around food, and how does that encourage your child to explore food in a way that feels safe for them? And again, in a way that doesn't involve a hidden agenda. Our kids are learning how to eat just like they're learning how to develop many other skills as they grow up, right? And food is one of those. Eating is one of those. And so we want to nurture a curious exploration of food. And the best way to do that is not pressure them to eat. Like eating a food is not the end goal. We want them to explore and be curious about it. And in order to do that, they need kind of a safe, judgment-free environment. And also, like asking certain questions can help facilitate that curiosity and exploration around food. So one thing I encourage is, I've heard this question a lot, like, well, if I'm not talking about food in terms of good or bad or healthy or unhealthy, how can I talk to my kids about food in a way that doesn't influence a rigid way of thinking about food? And one thing to think about is just focusing on the characteristics of food. What does the food look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? All of these things are ways that can, again, encourage just that natural curiosity without pressure to eat. That's a very important component of it, because sometimes I've seen this exploration of food used with kids in a way that totally has this hidden agenda of trying to get them to eat something. And we don't want to interlace our own agendas. We want our kids to be able to explore food on their own terms and in a way that feels good for them. So, asking reflective questions or just kind of observing, making observations like, I love asking my kids this question, like, what is something crunchy on your plate? And they'll kind of look around and look for something and talk about like, oh, when I bite into this, it makes a big loud crunch. So things like that help them to observe food in a totally different lens, one that doesn't revolve around diet culture in terms of numbers and calories. And, we want to move away from those nutrition facts in order to help them self-explore the different components of food and how that feels for them and how that feels within their own bodies. So talking about food through the lens of, ooh, this is sweet, or this is really crisp, or yum, this drink just tastes so refreshing. And I think a lot of this is unlearning for us too, right? Like you may have grown up in a home where you heard food talked about in these very kind of black or white terms. And part of healing your own relationship with food is actually rediscovering some of the different components of food that you may not have noticed before, because a lot of this diet culture information kind of took over all of that. So rediscovering food for yourself may also look like kind of this curious analysis of these different components about food. Like, what tastes good to you? What kind of flavors or textures do you enjoy? What temperature of food do you like? And when we can start exploring that for ourselves and kind of make our kids part of that natural, curious exploration phase of eating, it actually really can foster a natural, love of eating and make that a pleasurable experience for them. And this can go either way in terms of the experience. Like I have a couple of selective eaters myself. And, in talking about food, they've told me things like, ooh, that's really squishy. I don't like the way that feels in my mouth. And like, yeah, tell me more about that. What did that feel like in your mouth, And giving them permission to have their preferences, to like things, to dislike things. That's also really important to reinforcing that, hey, your body is the best judge of what you need. And you might like some things and you might not like other things. And that's okay. There's no good or bad versus how you feel about this particular food. And so again, like kind of going back to this main point here, it's just focusing on the characteristics of food, whether that's at meal times. And it doesn't have to be something that's forced. I think just asking conversation question starters that naturally kind of flow with the rhythm of your meals can be really helpful. And again, sometimes that involves things like asking, hey, what colors do you see on the table or here on the table? Or how did your tummy feel after you ate this meal? Like asking those natural questions to invite self-exploration in terms of eating and how that makes us feel can be really a key piece here for supporting our kids in learning to trust their bodies. So I wanted to just put that out there as an idea to help support you when it comes to, building this environment within your home that helps build a healthy relationship with food in your family and just a more positive culture around food in your home. Tip number 3 here is kind of piggybacking on our last point, but just teaching kids about food, where it comes from, all the different components associated with that. Because I think so often, sometimes kids show up to the table and like see a bunch of food and there can be a little bit of disconnect as to, all right, I have this food, I'm supposed to eat it, but there's so much more involved with that. And I think when we can, again, encourage this natural curiosity around food and eating, it really does invite our kids into a bigger story. And, I like to go really gently with this one because I think sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents to do all the things, right? Like I need to have my kids in the kitchen all the time and I need to be teaching them how to cook and letting them help me cook, which we know that could be super stressful for many, many reasons. But really, it's just inviting your children into the bigger story when it comes to food. And this is a big piece to, again, helping kids learn how to eat and learning how to eat in a manner that supports what feels best in their own bodies. Remember that eating is a skill that your children are learning and developing. And one big key piece that fosters learning is having experiences, right? Having exposures plus experiences really facilitates the learning process for our kids. We talked about this I think it was last week. We talked about how yes, your children have the innate abilities to self-regulate their food. However, they need experiences to grow and develop those skills. And, I think we often think about eating and like eating experiences as the only way in which kids learn about food. But in reality, kids need to have exposure to food and experiences around food in multiple ways, not just at the table, not just at meal times. This could be, like going out and trying different things, but also just like the exposure to food in multiple ways that we encounter food outside of just eating it alone. So that might be seeing food at the grocery store or seeing how food is actually grown, which I know can be harder depending on your situation. I know for me, I don't have a green thumb. I've tried gardening so many times, and for some reason, it's just not my thing. And so that's okay. I've learned to make peace with that. But, like we went to the pumpkin patch this year or last year for Halloween, and, it was like a legit pumpkin field where there was pumpkins and different squashes growing. And that was pretty neat for my kids to be able to see that, like, oh, that's actually where a pumpkin comes from. And that's how a pumpkin grows. And again, like having exposures or having opportunities where they can interact with food without feeling pressure to eat it can be so monumental in this long-term goal of just supporting them in an overall healthy relationship with food. Again, we tend to minimize the outside exposures because so often, as a parent, we just feel this pressure, like I have to get my kid to eat. Like that's my responsibility. I got to keep them alive. I got to make sure they're fed. And yes, of course, like that is, a big piece of parenting is feeding our children. And also remembering that eating is not the only way in which they're developing their skills and learning how to appreciate food and just build more positive associations and connections with food. So I just want you to think about, what are some exposures that you can invite your children into with food that don't necessarily involve eating directly. So that can be, talking about where food comes from or pointing things out at the grocery store that they're seeing, like, oh, look at this interesting vegetable. Like I've never seen this before, this fruit, and inviting them into those conversations. And this will vary depending on your child's age, but also showing them simple things in the kitchen, whatever that might look like how to prepare something, how to cut something, wash something, all the different ways they're interacting with food is really building a narrative about food in their minds. And the more we can invite positive connections around those foods, the more that it will support them also in building that healthy relationship with food. And again, I just want to encourage you to think about the season that you might be in. If you're in a busy season and just trying to survive, it's not necessarily going to be practical to have your child come into the kitchen with you or cook with you. Like sometimes you just need to get that food on the table and that's okay. Or sometimes you might not have the capacity to really engage with your child while trying to cook a meal for your family or get food, on the table. And that's okay too. Like, I think, again, we can take some of this information and just put so much pressure on ourselves to do things a certain way. But if your child senses that you are feeling stressed while, also trying to force something that may not necessarily come natural for you, you don't have to do that. It's okay. Remember that there's multiple ways that we can support our kids in engaging with food outside of meal times without having to put pressure on ourselves for things to look a certain way. It doesn't mean you have to turn your kitchen into Top Chef and, try to create this little foodie. That's not the intention at all. But more rather in the natural rhythms of your home, how are you having conversations around food, again, that don't involve having to eat that food, just exploring it from a really neutral place. And the nice thing is that there's a lot of books out there, play toys, things that can support your child in learning about food that don't necessarily revolve around having to eat it. Because sometimes at meal times when kids are sitting at a table, there's this expectation well, I'm supposed to eat. And sometimes that can feel like pressure. And the pressure to eat can sometimes negate their natural curiosity around wanting to explore the food because there's an objective connected with it. I'm supposed to eat this. So inviting those conversations around exploring food without the pressure to eat is going to really help support your child in building those positive connections with food, which again, long-term will support, again, their natural trust in themselves and connection with their body. Okay, so one more idea here for you today, and we will definitely do a part 2 on this next week. But just an idea to think about in terms of how can you help support your kids in building a lifelong, healthy and positive relationship with food in their bodies in ways that don't perpetuate diet culture into another generation is really with modeling. And I realize that this is a big concept and big idea, and there's a lot here that we can unpack. One thing I just want you to think about are the daily interactions that you regularly portray around food and just consider with an open mind and really like with a curious lens, not from a shame of self-criticism or shame, because that is not going to help you in any way, right? I just want you to think about this, but what are the daily messages that you may be sending your own child about food? And for example, like when it comes to eating, so many times we want our kids to sit down and eat. This is the big one. Yet we ourselves are up and running around and attending to everyone else and trying to get our kids to sit down and eat their food. And yet sometimes our kids don't see us, exemplifying that thing that we want them to do too, that behavior. They don't see us sitting down. They don't see us taking a break and enjoying our food and tasting our food and conversing with everyone around us, so that can create a dissonance in their mind between what we're asking them to do and what they actually see us doing. And again, this is not to create any shame, because it's hard to be a mom. It's really hard to be the primary caretaker and kind of carry this mental load of feeding our kids and nurturing them and taking care of them and trying to do all the things and feeling like we don't have time for ourselves. Like, I get it. It's really difficult. And I also just want you to consider, is there a discrepancy between maybe what your kids see you doing and what you're asking them to do for themselves? And again, I don't think this means when it comes to modeling that we have to kind of create this perfect imagery, because that doesn't exist and that's not real life. We want our kids to have permission to be human, to learn how to take care of themselves in a life-giving way, but also in a way that promotes flexibility and doesn't kind of fall on rigidity, right? Like that's part of having a healthy relationship with ourselves mentally and physically. But I just want you to consider what you're modeling and ask yourself, like, are there things that I might be asking my own child to do on a regular basis that I might not be doing for myself? Another thing to consider in this piece of modeling is also with the foods itself. So often we maybe subtly pressure our kids to eat certain things or wish our kids would try or eat certain things, but maybe we don't necessarily eat those things ourselves, or, we don't model enjoying and trying or eating a variety of foods. And that's not to say that if you model eating, said vegetable like broccoli, that your kid is going to automatically eat broccoli. Like that's not what this is about. However, our kids learn so much about eating and build natural curiosity when they see us eating. Like there's so much there that they're observing and cues and things that they're picking up on, which is why like this is such an amazing place to kind of have some self-awareness and examination around like what are the verbal and nonverbal messages that you may be communicating to your own child about food. And again, even on a subconscious level, like not fully aware that that's something that you're actually intentionally communicating to them, but are they observing certain messages based on behaviors that they're seeing? And this is where it can, again, be really helpful just to identify what is the environment, what is your natural tendencies around meal times. Do you tend to always kind of be up and moving and, trying to get other things done? Or is there any intentional time of connecting, of conversing? And oftentimes it's in those moments that our kids will build that natural curiosity around food and start to build more positive associations around meal times too. If they constantly are seeing us, stressed or engaging in negative commentary around food or our bodies or meal times, then that can also send certain messages to them about food and eating as well. And again, this is not to create this idea that our mealtime should always be perfect and stress-free. And, that's not real life at all. However, like the daily things that we tend to do, our habits that we fall into, especially around food and when it comes to meal times, those are important to look at because those are the things that become ingrained within our kids. And, that's where they tend to pick up messages around food and their bodies. So examining what your repetitious behaviors are, especially around food, or your language around food. Do your kids ever get to see you sitting down and eating and enjoying food? Do they get to see you trying different things, or maybe going out of your comfort zone and eating something that you might not normally eat? Do they see you enjoying, and having pleasure and satisfaction around food? Satisfaction and pleasure are such key components of health that we really tend to ignore and backburner. And this is where diet culture really gets it wrong. I mean, diet culture gets it wrong in every way, but especially in this way, promoting health being about the food itself and totally neglecting and negating the importance of joy and satisfaction, and how when we eat things that feel pleasurable and satisfying to us, that is healthful for our bodies. And when we can think about how we can model that to our kids, and in a way that feels natural to you. Again, I don't want you to feel like you have to force something that's not really there, because our kids can sense that, right? Like they're so amazing and they can really intuitively understand what's going on. But when they naturally see you enjoying things, especially food, like sending that message that this food is enjoyable, sitting down with you is enjoyable, even though it may not necessarily feel that way. And it may not be that experience every single time. But when you occasionally have those experiences with them, or more often than not, if you are having more positive experiences around food than negative, that can send a very powerful message to them. And it gives them permission. And it really does solidify this idea in their mind that, yeah, it's important for me to take a break and eat and feed my body. It's important for me to eat things that are satisfying and that taste good. And honestly, this is one of the most healing things I think in my own journey, and watching my kids and observing like the pleasure that they have in food. And I have one kiddo in particular that's very vocal and like makes these expressions around eating. Like she'll take a bite of ice cream and she'll close her eyes while she's eating it and just like kind of do this happy dance. And it makes me so happy when I see that, because I'm like, yes, like our food should be pleasurable and enjoyable. And, I wonder sometimes, like, are those messages that we communicate, do they see us enjoying food? And again, I want you to hear me out. It does not mean that every single eating experience that you have is going to be amazing, where the heavens open up and, this shining light is pouring out on you. Like sometimes you just have to eat because you have to feed yourself and you have to move on and keep going with your day. And that's okay. But again, what's the overarching message that you are sending to your children from the daily behaviors that you are modeling around food and eating times? Take a look at that and just kind of self-examine that and see where there is some potential to, rewrite the script, rewrite the narrative, and ultimately, again, support them in building a lifelong relationship with food and their bodies that's centered on trust and confidence. So we will pick up on this conversation. Come back next week, Mama. We'll talk about part 2 in terms of behaviors, things that you can do to support your kids in building a healthy lifestyle, really, that does not perpetuate any form of diet culture into their lives. So I'll see you next week. Can't wait to restart this conversation then. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lift the Shame podcast. For more tips and guidance on your motherhood journey, come connect with me on Instagram @CrystalCargis. Until next week, Mama, I'll be cheering you on. Bye for now.